Part 6 of the audiobook, King Solomon's Mines 2. Of the men stepped forward, and as they did so, the girl, for the first time realizing her impending fate, screamed aloud and turned to fly. But the strong hands caught her fast and brought her, struggling and weeping, up before us. "What is thy name, girl?" piped Gagul. "What? Wilt thou not answer? Shall the king's son do his work at once?" At this hint, Scragga, looking more evil than ever, advanced a step and lifted his great spear, and as he did so I saw Good's hand creep to his revolver. The poor girl caught the glint of the cold steel through her tears, and it sobered her anguish. She ceased struggling, but merely clasped her hands convulsively and stood shuddering from head to foot. "See!" cried Scragga in high glee. "She shrinks from the sight of my little plaything even before she has tasted it," and he tapped the broad blade of the spear. "If ever I get the chance, you shall pay for that, you young hound." I heard Good mutter beneath his breath, "Now that thou art quiet, give us thy name, my dear. Come, speak up and fear not," said Gagul in mockery. "Oh, mother," answered the girl in trembling accents, "my name is Fulata of the house of Suko." "Oh, mother, why must I die? I have done no wrong." "Be comforted," went on the old woman in her hateful tone of mockery. "Thou must die indeed, as a sacrifice to the old ones who sit yonder," and she pointed to the peaks. "But it is better to sleep in the night than to toil in the daytime. It is better to die 166 King Solomon's mines than to live, and thou shalt die by the royal hand of the king's own son." The girl Fulata wrung her hands in anguish and cried out aloud, "O cruel, and I so young! What have I done that I should never again see the sun rise out of the night, or the stars come following on his track in the evening, that I should no more gather the flowers when the dew is heavy, or listen to the laughing of the waters? Woe is me, that I shall never see my father's hut again, nor feel my mother's kiss, nor tend the kid that is sick. Woe is me, that no lover shall put his arm around me and look into my eyes, nor shall men children be born of me. O cruel, cruel!" And again she wrung her hands and turned her tear-stained, flower-crowned face to heaven, looking so lovely in her despair, for she was indeed a beautiful woman, that it would assuredly have melted the hearts of anyone less cruel than the three fiends before us. Prince Arthur's appeal to the ruffians who came to blind him was not more touching than this savage girl's. But it did not move Gagul or Gagul's master, though I saw signs of pity among the guard behind and on the faces of the chiefs. And as for Good, he gave a sort of snort of indignation and made a motion as though to go to her. With all a woman's quickness, the doomed girl interpreted what was passing in his mind, and with a sudden movement flung herself before him and clasped his beautiful white legs with her hands. "O white father from the stars," she cried, "throw over me the mantle of thy protection. Let me creep into the shadow of thy strength, that I may be we give a sign." 157. Saved. "Oh, keep me from these cruel men and from the mercies of Gagul." "All right, my hearty, I'll look after you," sang out Good in nervous Saxon. "And come, get up, there's a good girl," and he stooped and caught her hand. Twala turned and motioned to his son, who advanced with his spear lifted. "Now's your time," whispered Sir Henry to me. "What are you waiting for?" "I am waiting for the eclipse," I answered. "I have had my eye on the sun for the last half hour, and I never saw it look healthier." "Well, you must risk it now, or the girl will be killed. Twala is losing patience." Recognizing the force of the argument, having cast one more despairing look at the bright face of the sun, for never did the most ardent astronomer with a theory to prove await a celestial event with such anxiety, I stepped with all the dignity I could command between the prostrate girl and the advancing spear of Scragga. "King," I said, "this shall not be. We will not tolerate such a thing. Let the girl go in safety." Twala rose from his seat in his wrath and astonishment, and from the chiefs and serried ranks of girls, who had slowly closed up upon us in anticipation of the tragedy, came a murmur of amazement. "Shall not be, thou white dog, who yaps at the lion in his cave, shall not be. Art thou mad? Be careful lest this chicken's fate overtakes thee, and those with thee. How canst thou prevent it? Who art thou that thou standest between me and my will? Withdraw, I say. Scragger, kill her. Ho, guards, seize these men." 168. King Solomon's Mines. At his cry, armed men came running swiftly from behind the hut, where they had evidently been placed beforehand. Sir Henry, Good, and Umbopa ranged themselves alongside of me and lifted their rifles. "Stop!" I shouted boldly, though at the moment my heart was in my boots. "Stop! We, the white men from the stars, say that it shall not be. Come but one pace nearer, and we will put out the sun and plunge the land in darkness. Ye shall taste of our magic." My threat produced an effect. The men halted and Scragger stood still before us, his spear lifted. "Hear him! Hear him!" piped Gagool. "Hear the liar who says he will put out the sun like a lamp. Let him do it, and the girl shall be spared. Yes, let him do it, or die with the girl, he and those with him." He glanced up at the sun, and to my intense joy and relief, saw that we had made no mistake. On the edge of its brilliant surface was a faint rim of shadow. I lifted my hand solemnly towards the sky, an example which Sir Henry and Good followed, and quoted a line or two of the Ingoldsby Legends at it in the most impressive tones I could command. Sir Henry followed suit with a verse out of the Old Testament, whilst Good addressed the King of Day in a volume of the most classical bad language that he could think of. Slowly the dark rim crept on over the blazing surface, and as it did so, I heard a deep gasp of fear rise from the multitude around. "Look, O King! Look, Gagool! Look, chiefs and people and women, and see if the white men from the stars keep their word, or if they be but empty liars." And we give a sign. 169. The sun grows dark before your eyes. Soon there will be night in the noontime. Ye have asked for a sign, it is given to ye. Grow dark, O sun, withdraw thy light, thou bright one. Bring the proud heart to the dust, and eat up the world with shadows. A groan of terror rose from the onlookers. Some stood petrified with fear. Others threw themselves upon their knees and cried out. As for the king, he sat still and turned pale beneath his dusky skin. Only Gagool kept her courage. "It will pass," she cried. "I have seen the like before. No man can put out the sun. Lose not heart. Sit still, the shadow will pass." "Wait, and ye shall see," I replied, hopping with excitement. "Keep it up, Good, I can't remember any more poetry. Curse away, there's a good fellow." Good responded nobly to the tax upon his inventive faculties. Never before had I the faintest conception of the breadth and depth and height of a naval officer's objurgatory powers. For 10 minutes he went on without stopping, and he scarcely ever repeated himself. Meanwhile the dark ring crept on. Strange and unholy shadows encroached upon the sunlight. An ominous quiet filled the place. The birds chirped out frightened notes, and then were still. Only the cocks began to crow. On, yet on, crept the ring of darkness. It was now more than half over the reddening orb. The air grew thick and dusky. On, yet on, till we could scarcely see the fierce faces of the group before us. No sound. 170, King Solomon's Mines, rose now from the spectators, and Good stopped swearing. "The sun is dying, the wizards have killed the sun," yelled out the boy. "Scragger at last, we shall all die in the dark." And animated by fear or fury or both, he lifted his spear and drove it with all his force at Sir Henry's broad chest. But he had forgotten the mail shirts that the king had given us, and which we wore beneath our clothing. The steel rebounded harmless, and before he could repeat the blow, Sir Henry had snatched the spear from his hand and sent it straight through him. He dropped dead. At the sight, and driven mad with fear at the gathering gloom, the companies of girls broke up in wild confusion and ran screeching for the gateways. Nor did the panic stop there. The king himself, followed by the guards, some of the chiefs, and Gagul, who hobbled away after them with marvelous alacrity, fled for the huts, so that in another minute or so ourselves, the would-be victim, Fulata, Infidus, and some of the chiefs who had interviewed us on the previous night, were left alone upon the scene with the dead body of Scragga. "Now, chiefs," I said, "we have given you the sign. If ye are satisfied, let us fly swiftly to the place ye spoke of. The charm cannot now be stopped. It will work for an hour. Let us take advantage of the darkness." "Come," said Infidus, turning. "To go," an example which was followed by the awed chiefs ourselves and the girl Fulata, whom Good took by the hand. Before we reached the gate of the kraal, the sun went out altogether. Before the battle. 171. Holding each other by the hand, we stumbled on through the darkness. Chapter 2. Before the battle. Luckily for us, Infidus and the chiefs knew all the pathways of the great town perfectly, so that notwithstanding the intense gloom, we made fair progress. For an hour or more we journeyed on, till at length the eclipse began to pass, and that edge of the sun, which had disappeared the first, became again visible. In another 5 minutes there was sufficient light to see our whereabouts, and we then discovered that we were clear of the town of Lu and approaching a large flat-topped hill, measuring some 2 miles in circumference. This hill, which was of a formation very common in southern Africa, was not very high. Indeed, its greatest elevation was not more than 200 feet, but it was shaped like a horseshoe, and its sides were rather precipitous and strewn with boulders. On the grass tableland at the top was ample camping ground, which had been utilized. As a military cantonment of no mean strength, its ordinary garrison was 1 regiment of 3,000 men, but as we toiled up the steep side of the hill in the returning daylight, we perceived that there were many more warriors than that upon it. Reaching the tableland at last, we found crowds of men huddled together in the utmost consternation at the natural phenomenon which they were witnessing. Passing through these without a word, we gained a hut in the center of the ground, where we were astonished, 172 King Solomon's mines, to find 2 men waiting, laden with our few goods and chattels, which of course we had been obliged to leave behind in our hasty flight. "I sent for them," explained Infidus, "also for these," and he lifted up Good's long-lost trousers. With an exclamation of rapturous delight, Good sprang at them, and instantly proceeded to put them on. "Surely my lord will not hide his beautiful white legs," exclaimed Infidus regretfully. But Good persisted, and once only did the Kukuana people get the chance of seeing his beautiful legs again. Good is a very modest man. Henceforward they had to satisfy their aesthetic longings with his 1 whisker, his transparent eye, and his movable teeth. Still gazing with fond remembrance at Good's trousers, Infidus next informed us that he had summoned the regiments to explain to them fully the rebellion which was decided on by the chiefs, and to introduce to them the rightful heir to the throne, Ignosi. In half an hour, the troops, in all nearly 20,000 men, constituting the flower of the Kukuana army, were mustered on a large open space, to which we proceeded. The men were drawn up in 3 sides of a dense square, and presented a magnificent spectacle. We took our station on the open side of the square, and were speedily surrounded by all the principal chiefs and officers. These, after silence had been proclaimed, Infidus proceeded to address. He narrated to them in vigorous and graceful language, for like most Kukuanas of before the battle. 173. High rank. He was a born orator. The history of Ignosi's father, how he had been basely murdered by Twala, the king, and his wife and child, driven out to starve. Then he pointed out how the land suffered and groaned under Twala's cruel rule, instancing the proceedings of the previous night, when, under pretense of their being evildoers, many of the noblest in the land had been hauled forth and cruelly done to death. Next he went on to say that the white lords from the stars, looking down on the land, had perceived its trouble, and determined, at great personal inconvenience, to alleviate its lot, how they had accordingly taken the real king of the country, Ignosi, who was languishing in exile, by the hand, and led him over the mountains. How they had seen the wickedness of Twala's doings, and for a sign to the wavering and to save the life of the girl Fulata, had actually, by the exercise of their high magic, put out the sun and slain the young fiend Scragga, and how they were prepared to stand by them and assist them to overthrow Twala, and set up the rightful king Ignosi in his place. He finished his discourse amidst a murmur of approbation, and then Ignosi stepped forward and began to speak. Having reiterated all that Infidus his uncle had said, he concluded a powerful speech in these words: "O chiefs, captains, soldiers, and people, ye have heard my words. Now must ye make choice between me and him who sits upon my throne, the uncle who killed his brother, and hunted his brother's child forth to die in the cold and the night. That I am indeed the king, these, pointing to the chiefs, can tell ye 174 King Solomon's minds, for they have seen the snake about my middle. If I were not the king, would these white men be on my side with all their magic? Tremble, chiefs, captains, soldiers, and people. Is not the darkness they have brought upon the land to confound Twala and cover our flight yet before your eyes?" "It is," answered the soldiers. "I am the king." "I say to ye, I am the king," went on Ignosi, drawing up his great stature to its full, and lifting his broad-bladed battle-axe above his head. "If there be any man among ye who says that it is not so, let him stand forth, and I will fight him. Now in his blood shall be a red token that I tell ye true. Let him stand forth, I say." And he shook the great axe till it flashed in the sunlight. As nobody seemed inclined to respond to this heroic version of "Dilly, Dilly, come and be killed," our late henchman proceeded with his address. "I am indeed the king, and if ye do stand by my side in the battle, if I win the day, ye shall go with me to victory and honour. I will give ye oxen and wives, and ye shall take place of all the regiments, and if ye fall, I will fall with ye. And behold, this promise do I give ye, that when I sit upon the seat of my fathers, bloodshed shall cease in the land. No longer shall ye cry for justice to find slaughter, no longer shall the witch-finder hunt ye out, so that ye be slain without a cause. No man shall die save he who offendeth against the laws. The eating up of your krals shall cease. Each shall sleep secure in his own hut, and fear not, and justice shall walk blind throughout the land. Have ye chosen chiefs, captains, soldiers, and people before the battle?" 175. "We have chosen, O king," came back the answer. "It is well. Turn your heads and see how Twala's messengers go forth from the great town, east and west and north and south, to gather a mighty army to slay me and ye and these, my friends and my protectors. Tomorrow, or perchance the next day, will he come with all who are faithful to him. Then shall I see the man who is indeed my man, the man who fears not to die for his cause. And I tell ye, he shall not be forgotten in the time of spoil. I have spoken, O chiefs, captains, soldiers, and people. Now go to your huts and make you ready for war." There was a pause, and then one of the chiefs lifted his hand, and out rolled the royal salute, "Cum." It was a sign that the regiments accepted Ignosi as their king. Then they marched off in battalions. Half an hour afterwards, we held a council of war, at which all the commanders of regiments were present. It was evident to us that before very long we should be attacked in overwhelming force. Indeed, from our point of vantage on the hill, we could see troops mustering, and messengers going forth from Lu in every direction, doubtless to summon regiments to the king's assistance. We had on our side about 20,000 men, composed of 7 of the best regiments in the country. Twala had, so Infidus and the chiefs calculated, at least 30 to 35,000 on whom he could rely at present assembled in Loo, and they thought that by midday on the morrow he would be able to gather another 5,000 or more to his aid. It was, of course, possible that some of his troops would desert and come over to us, but it was not a contingency that could be reckoned on. 176. King Solomon's Mines. Meanwhile, it was clear that active preparations were being made to subdue us. Already strong bodies of armed men were patrolling round and round the foot of the hill, and there were other signs of a coming attack. Infidus and the chiefs, however, were of opinion that no attack would take place that night, which would be devoted to preparation and to the removal by every possible means of the moral effect produced upon the minds of the soldiery by the supposed magical darkening of the sun. The attack would be on the morrow, they said, and they proved to be right. Meanwhile, we set to work to strengthen the Positaion as much as possible. Nearly the entire force was turned out, and in the 2 hours which yet remained to sundown wonders were done. The paths up the hill, which was rather a sanitarium than a fortress, being used generally as the camping place of regiments suffering from recent service in unhealthy portions of the country, were carefully blocked with masses of stones, and every other possible approach was made as impregnable as time would allow. Piles of boulders were collected at various spots to be rolled down upon an advancing enemy. Stations were appointed to the different regiments, and every other preparation which our joint ingenuity could suggest was taken. Just before sundown, we perceived a small company of men advancing towards us from the direction of Loo, one of whom bore a palm leaf in his hand as a sign that he came as a herald. As he came, Ignosi, Infidus, 1 or 2 chiefs before the battle, 177 1 AD, and ourselves went down to the foot of the mountain to meet him. He was a gallant-looking fellow with the regulation leopard-skin cloak. "Greeting," he cried as he came near, "the king's greeting to those who make unholy war against the king, the lion's greeting to the jackals who snarl around his heels." "Speak," I said. "These are the king's words. Surrender to the king's. Mercy ere a worse thing befall ye. Already the shoulder has been torn from the black bull, and the king drives him bleeding about the camp." "What are Twala's terms?" I asked for curiosity. "His terms are merciful, worthy of a great king. These are the words of Twala, the one-eyed, the mighty, the husband of 1,000 wives, lord of the Kukuanas, keeper of the great road, Solomon's road, beloved of the strange ones who sit in silence at the mountains yonder, the 3 witches, calf of the black cow, elephant whose tread shakes the earth, terror of the evildoer, ostrich whose feet devour the desert, huge one, black one, wise one, king from generation to generation. These are the words of Twala. I will have mercy and be satisfied with a little blood. 1 in every 10 shall die, the rest shall go free. But the white man Incubu, who slew Scragga my son, and the black man his servant, who pretends to my throne, and Infidus my brother, who brews rebellion against me, these shall die by torture, as an offering. This cruel custom is not confined to the Kukuanas, but is by no means uncommon amongst African tribes on the occasion of the outbreak of war or any other important public event. AQ King Solomon's Mines, 12-178 King Solomon's Mines, to the silent ones. Such are the merciful words of Twala. After consulting with the others a little, I answered him in a loud voice, so that the soldiers might hear, thus: "Go back, thou dog, to Twala, who sent thee, and say that we, Ignosi, veritable king of the Kukuanas, Inkubu, Bugwan, and Makumazan, the wise white ones from the stars who make dark the sun, Infidus of the royal house, and the chiefs, captains, and people here gathered make answer and say that we will not surrender, that before the sun has twice gone down, Twala's corpse shall stiffen at Twala's gate, and Ignosi, whose father Twala slew, shall reign in his stead. Now go, ere we whip thee away, and beware how ye lift a hand against such as we." The herald laughed loud. "Ye frighten not men with such swelling words," he cried out. "Show yourselves as bold tomorrow, O ye who darken the sun. Be bold, fight, and be merry, before the crows pick your bones, till they are whiter than your faces. Farewell, perhaps we may meet in the fight. Wait for me, I pray, white men." And with this shaft of sarcasm he retired, and almost immediately the sun sank. That night was a busy one for us, for as far as was possible by the moonlight, all preparations for the morrow's fight were continued. Messengers were constantly coming and going from the place where we sat in council. At last, about an hour after midnight, everything that could be done was done, and the camp, save for the occasional challenge of a sentry, sank into sleep. Sir Henry and I, accompanied by Ignosi and one of the chiefs, descended the hill and made the before the battle, 179 Diesco round of the outposts. As we went, suddenly, from all sorts of unexpected places, spears gleamed out in the moonlight, only to vanish again as we uttered the password. It was clear to us that none were sleeping at their posts. Then we returned, picking our way through thousands of sleeping warriors, many of whom were taking their last earthly rest. The moonlight flickered along their spears and played upon their features and made them ghastly. The chilly night wind tossed their tall and hearse-like plumes. There they lay in wild confusion, with arms outstretched and twisted limbs, their stern, stalwart forms looking weird and unhuman in the moonlight. "How many of these do you suppose will be alive at this time tomorrow?" asked Sir Henry. I shook my head and looked again at the sleeping men, and to my tired and yet excited imagination it seemed as though death had already touched them. My mind's eye singled out those who were sealed to slaughter, and there rushed in upon my heart a great sense of the mystery of human life, and an overwhelming sorrow at its futility and sadness. Tonight these thousands slept their healthy sleep. Tomorrow they, and many others with them, ourselves perhaps among them, would be stiffening in the cold. Their wives would be widows, their children fatherless, and their place know them no more forever. Only the old moon would shine serenely on, the night wind would stir the grasses, and the wide earth would take its happy rest, even as it did aeons before these were, and will do aeons after they have been forgotten. Yet man dies not, whilst the world, at once his mother and his monument, remains. His name is 4124-180, King Solomon's Mines. Forgotten indeed, but the breath he breathed yet stirs the pine tops on the mountains. The sound of the words he spoke yet echoes on through space. The thoughts his brain gave birth to we have inherited. Today, his passions are our cause of life. The joys and sorrows that he felt are our familiar friends. The end from which he fled aghast will surely overtake us also. Truly, the universe is full of ghosts, not sheeted churchyard spectres, but the inextinguishable and immortal elements of life, which having once been can never die, though they blend and change again forever. All sorts of reflections of this sort pass through my mind, for as I get older, I regret to say that a detestable habit of thinking seems to be getting a hold of me, while I stood and stared at those grim yet fantastic lines of warriors sleeping, as their saying goes, upon their spears. "Adi, Curtis," I said to Sir Henry, "I am in a condition of pitiable funk." Sir Henry stroked his yellow beard and laughed as he answered, "I've heard you make that sort of remark before, Quatermain." "Well, I mean it now. Do you know, I very much doubt if one of us will be alive tomorrow night. We shall be attacked in overwhelming force, and it is exceedingly doubtful if we can hold this place. We'll give a good account of some of them, at any rate. Look here, Quatermain, the business is a nasty one, and one with which, properly speaking, we ought not to be mixed up, but we are in for it, so we must before the battle. 181 SS Co. 1, make the best of it. Speaking personally, I had rather be killed fighting than any other way, and now that there seems little chance of my finding my poor brother, it makes the idea easier to me. But fortune favors the brave, and we may succeed. Anyway, the slaughter will be awful, and as we have a reputation to keep up, we shall have to be in the thick of it." Sir Henry made this last remark in a mournful voice, but there was a gleam in his eye which belied it. I have a sort of idea that Sir Henry Curtis actually likes fighting. After this, we went and slept for a couple of hours. Just about dawn, we were awakened by infidels, who came to say that great activity was to be observed in Loo, and that parties of the king's skirmishers were driving in our outposts. We got up and dressed ourselves for the fray, each putting on our chain armor shirt, for which at the present juncture we felt exceedingly thankful. Sir Henry went the whole length about the matter and dressed himself like a native warrior. "When you are in Kukuanaland, do as the Kukuanas do," he remarked, as he drew the shining steel over his broad shoulders, which it fitted like a glove. Nor did he stop there. At his request, Infidus had provided him with a complete set of war uniform. Round his throat he fastened the leopard skin cloak of a commanding officer. On his brows he bound the plume of black ostrich feathers, worn only by generals of high rank, and round his centre a magnificent musha of white oxtails. A pair of sandals, a leglet of goat's hair, a heavy battle-axe with a rhinoceros horn handle, a round iron shield covered with white ox hide, and the 182 King Solomon's mines. Regulation number of tollas, or throwing knives, made up his equipment, to which, however, he added his revolver. The dress was, no doubt, a savage one, but I'm bound to say I never saw a finer sight than Sir Henry Curtis presented in this guise. It showed off his magnificent physique to the greatest advantage, and when Ignosi arrived presently, arrayed in similar costume, I thought to myself that I never before saw two such splendid men. As for Good and myself, the chain armor did not suit us nearly so well. To begin with, Good insisted upon keeping on his trousers, and a stout, short gentleman with an eyeglass and one half of his face shaved, arrayed in a mail shirt carefully, tucked into a very seedy pair of corduroys, looks more striking than imposing. As for myself, my chain shirt being too big for me, I put it on over all my clothes, which caused it to bulge out in a somewhat ungainly fashion. I discarded my trousers, however, determined to go into battle with bare legs, in order to be the lighter, in case it became necessary to retire quickly, retaining only my veldschoons. This, a spear, a shield which I did not know how to use, a couple of tollas, a revolver, and a huge plume, which I pinned into the top of my shooting hat, in order to give a bloodthirsty finish to my appearance, completed my modest equipment. In addition to all these articles, of course, we had our rifles, but as ammunition was scarce, and they would be useless in case of a charge, we had arranged to have them carried behind us by bearers. As soon as we had equipped ourselves, we hastily swallowed some food, and then started out to see how things were progressing. At one point in the tableland of the mountain, there was a little copy of brown stone, before the battle. 183 ESPE12D8 GU 0 Eco, which served for the double purpose of headquarters and a conning tower. Here we found Infidus surrounded by his own regiment, the Greys, which was undoubtedly the finest in the Kukuana army, and the same which we had first seen at the outlying kraal. This regiment, now 3,500 strong, was being held in reserve, and the men were lying down on the grass in companies and watching the king's forces creep out of Loo in long ant-like columns. There seemed to be no end to those. Columns, 3 in all, and each numbering at least 11 or 12,000 men. As soon as they were clear of the town, they formed up. Then one body marched off to the right, one to the left, and the third came slowly on towards us. "Ah," said Infidus, "they are going to attack us on 3 sides at once." This was rather serious news, for as our position on the top of the mountain, which was at least 1.5 miles in circumference, was an extended one, It was important to us to concentrate our comparatively small defending force as much as possible. But as it was impossible for us to dictate in what way we should be attacked, we had to make the best of it and accordingly sent orders to the various regiments to prepare to receive the separate onslaughts. 84. King Solomon's Mines. Chapter 13. The Attack. Slowly, and without the slightest appearance of haste or excitement, the three columns crept on. When within about 500 yards of us, the main or center column halted at the root of a tongue of open plain which ran up into the hill to enable the other two to circumvent our position, which was shaped more or less in the form of a horseshoe, the 2 points being towards the town of Loo, their object being, no doubt, that the threefold assault should be delivered simultaneously. "Oh, for a Gatling!" groaned Good, as he contemplated the serried phalanxes beneath us. "I would clear the plain in 20 minutes. We have not got one, so it is no use yearning for it. But suppose you try a shot, Quatermain. See how near you can go to that tall fellow who appears to be in command. 2 to 1 you miss him, and an even sovereign to be honestly paid if ever we get out of this, that you don't drop the ball within 10 yards. This piqued me, so, loading the express with solid ball, I waited till my friend walked some 10 yards, out from his force, in order to get a better view of our position, accompanied only by an orderly. And then, lying down and resting the express upon a rock, I covered him. The rifle, like all expresses, was only sighted to 350 yards, so to allow for the drop in trajectory, I took him halfway down the attack. 185. Mother neck, which ought, I calculated, to find him in the chest. He stood quite still and gave me every opportunity, but whether it was the excitement or the wind or the fact of the man being a long shot, I don't know, but this was what happened. Getting dead on, as I thought, a fine sight, I pressed, and when the puff of smoke had cleared away, I, to my disgust, saw my man standing unharmed, whilst his orderly, who was at least 3 paces to the left, was stretched upon the ground, apparently dead. Turning swiftly, the officer I had aimed at began to run towards his force in evident alarm. "Bravo, Quatermain!" sang out Good. "You've frightened him." This made me very angry, for if possible to avoid it, I hate to miss. In public, when one can only do one thing well, one likes to keep up one's reputation in that thing. Moved quite out of myself at my failure, I did a rash thing. Rapidly covering the general as he ran, I let drive with the second barrel. The poor man threw up his arms and fell forward onto his face. This time I had made no mistake, and I say it as a proof of how little we think of others when our own pride or reputation are in question. I was brute enough to feel delighted at the sight. The regiments who had seen the feat cheered wildly at this exhibition of the white man's magic, which they took as an omen of success, while the force to which the general had belonged, which indeed, as we afterwards ascertained he had commanded, began to fall back in confusion. Sir Henry and Good now took up their rifles and began to fire, the latter industriously browning the dense mass before him with a Win 186 King Solomon's Mines. Chester Repeater and I also had another shot or two, with the result that so far as we could judge, we put some 8 or 10 men hors de combat before they got out of range. Just as we stopped firing, there came an ominous roar from our far right, then a similar roar from our left. The 2 other divisions were engaging us. At the sound, the mass of men before us opened out a little, and came on towards the hill, up the spit of bare grassland at a slow trot, singing a deep-throated song as they advanced. We kept up a steady fire from our rifles as they came, Ignosi joining in occasionally, and accounted for several men, but of course produced no more effect upon that mighty rush of armed humanity than he who throws pebbles does on the advancing wave. On they came, with a shout and the clashing of spears. Now they were driving in the outposts we had placed among the rocks at the foot of the hill. After that the advance was a little slower, for though as yet we had offered no serious opposition, The attacking force had to come uphill and came slowly to save their breath. Our first line of defense was about halfway up the side, our second 50 yards further back, while our third occupied the edge of the plain. On they came, shouting their war cry, "Twala, twala, chiele, chiele, twala, twala, smite, smite." "Ignosi, ignosi, chiele, chiele," answered our people. They were quite close now, and the tolas, or throwing knives, began to flash backwards and forwards, and now with an awful yell the battle closed in. To and fro swayed the mass of struggling warriors, men falling thick as leaves in an autumn wind. But the attack. 187. Before long, the superior weight of the attacking force began to tell, and our first line of defense was slowly pressed back, till it merged into the second. Here the struggle was very fierce, but again our people were driven back and up, till at length, within 20 minutes of the commencement of the fight, our third line came into action. But by this time the assailants were much exhausted, and had besides lost many men killed and wounded, and to break through that third impenetrable hedge of spears proved beyond their powers. For a while the dense mass of struggling warriors swung backwards and forwards in the fierce ebb and flow of battle, and the issue was doubtful. Sir Henry watched the desperate struggle with a kindling eye, and then without a word he rushed off, followed by Good, and flung himself into the hottest of the fray. As for myself, I stopped where I was. The soldiers caught sight of his tall form as he plunged into the battle, and there rose a cry of, "Nanzia inkubu! Here is the elephant! Chiele! Chiele!" From that moment the issue was no longer in doubt. Inch by inch, fighting with desperate gallantry, the attacking force was pressed back down the hillside, till at last it retreated upon its reserves in something like confusion. At that moment, too, a messenger arrived to say that the left attack had been repulsed, and I was just beginning to congratulate myself that the affair was over for the present, when, to our horror, we perceived our men, who had been engaged in the right defence, being driven towards us across the plain. Foal 188. King Solomon's mines, loaded by swarms of the enemy, who had evidently succeeded at this point. Ignosi, who was standing by me, took in the situation at a glance and issued a rapid order. Instantly the reserve regiment round us, the Greys, extended itself. Again Ignosi gave a word of command, which was taken up and repeated by the captains, and in another second, to my intense disgust, I found myself involved in a furious onslaught upon the advancing foe. Getting as much as I could behind Ignosi's huge frame, I made the best of a bad job and toddled along to be killed, as though I liked it. In a minute or two, the time seemed all too short to me. We were plunging through the flying groups of our men, who at once began to reform behind us, and then I am sure I do not know what happened. All I can remember is a dreadful rolling noise of the meeting of shields, and the sudden apparition of a huge ruffian whose eyes seemed literally to be starting out of his head, making straight at me with a bloody spear. But I say it with pride, I rose to the occasion. It was an occasion before which most people would have collapsed once and for all, seeing that if I stood where I was, I must be done for. I, as the horrid apparition came, flung myself down in front of him so cleverly that, being unable to stop himself, he took a header right over my prostrate form. Before he could rise again, I had risen and settled the matter from behind with my revolver. Shortly after this, somebody knocked me down, and I remember no more of the charge. When I came to, I found myself back at the copy. The attack 189, with Good bending over me with some water in a gourd. "How do you feel, old fellow?" he asked anxiously. He got up and shook myself before answering. "Pretty well, thank you," I answered. "Thank heaven. When I saw them carry you in, I felt quite sick. I thought you were done for. Not this time, my boy. I fancy I only got a rap on the head, which knocked me out of time. How has it ended? They are repulsed at every point for the time. The loss is dreadfully heavy. We have lost quite 2,000 killed and wounded, and they must have lost 3. Look, there's a sight!" And he pointed to long lines of men advancing by 4s. In the center of, and being borne by each group of 4, was a kind of hide tray, of which a Kukuana force always carried a quantity, with a loop for a handle at each corner. On these trays, and their number seemed endless, lay wounded men, who, as they arrived, were hastily examined by the medicine men, of whom 10 were attached to each regiment. If the wound was not of a fatal character, the sufferer was taken away and attended to as carefully as circumstances would allow. But if, on the other hand, the wounded man's condition was hopeless, what followed was very dreadful, though doubtless it was the truest mercy. One of the doctors, under pretence of carrying out an examination, swiftly opened an artery with a sharp knife, and in a minute or 2 the sufferer expired painlessly. There were many cases that day in which this was done. In fact, it was done in most cases when the wound was in the body, for the gash made by the entry of the enormously 190 King Solomon's mines. Broad spears used by the Kukuanas generally rendered recovery hopeless. In most cases, the poor sufferers were already unconscious, and in others, the fatal nick of the artery was done so swiftly and painlessly that they did not seem to notice it. Still, it was a ghastly sight, and one from which we were glad to escape. Indeed, I never remember one which affected me more than seeing those gallant soldiers thus put out of pain by the red-handed medicine men, except, indeed, on an occasion when, after an attack, I saw a force of Swazis burying their hopelessly wounded alive. Hurrying from this dreadful scene to the further side of the kopje, we found Sir Henry, who still held a bloody battle-axe in his hand, Ignosi, Infidus, and 1 or 2 of the chiefs in deep consultation. "Thank heavens, here you are, Quatermain!" I can't quite make out what Ignosi wants to do. It seems that, though we have beaten off the attack, Twala is now receiving large reinforcements and is showing a disposition to invest us with a view of starving us out. That's awkward. Yes, especially as Infadu says that the water supply has given out. "My lord, that is so," said Infidus. "The spring cannot supply the wants of so great a multitude and is failing rapidly. Before night we shall all be thirsty. Listen, Macumazahn. Thou art wise, and hast doubtless seen many wars in the lands from whence thou camest, that is, if, indeed, they make wars in the stars. Now tell us, what shall we do? Twala has brought up many fresh men to take the place of those who have fallen. But Twala has learnt a lesson, that the attack, 191 iot erid s as dikata ep, the EL12 IG 121. Hawk did not think to find the heron ready, but our beak has pierced his breast. He will not strike at us again. We too are wounded, and he will wait for us to die. He will wind himself round us like a snake round a buck, and fight the fight of sit down. I hear you, I said. So, Macumazahn, thou seest we have no water here, and but a little food, and we must choose between these 3 things to languish, like a starving lion in his den, or to strive to break away towards the north, or, and here he rose and pointed towards the dense mass of our foes, to launch ourselves straight at Twala's throat. Inkubu, the great warrior, for today he fought like a buffalo in a net, and Twala's soldiers went down before his axe, like corn before the hail. With these eyes I saw it. Inkubu says, charge, but the elephant is ever prone to charge. Now, what? And says Macumazahn, the wily old fox, who has seen much and loves to bite his enemy from behind? The last word is in Ignosi the king, for it is a king's right to speak of war. But let us hear thy voice, O Macumazahn, who watchest by night, and the voice too of him of the transparent eye. What sayest thou, Ignosi? I asked. Nay, my father, answered our quondam servant, who now, clad as he was in the full panoply of savage war, looked every inch a warrior king. Do thou speak, and let me, who am but a child in wisdom beside thee, hearken to thy words. Thus abjured, I, after taking hasty counsel with Good and Sir Henry, delivered my opinion briefly to the effect that, being trapped, our best chance, especially in view of the failure of our water supply, 192 King Solomon's mines, was to initiate an attack upon Twala's forces, and then I recommended that the attack should be delivered at once, before our wounds grew stiff, and also before the sight of Twala's overpowering force caused the hearts of our soldiers to wax small like fat before a fire. Otherwise, I pointed out, some of the captains might change their minds, and making peace with Twala, desert to him, or even betray us into his hands. This expression of opinion seemed on the whole to be favorably received. Indeed, among the Kukuanas, my utterances met with a respect which has never been accorded to them, before or since. But the real decision as to our course lay with Ignosi, who, since he had been recognized as rightful king, could exercise the almost unbounded rights of sovereignty, including, of course, the final decision on matters of generalship, and it was to him that all eyes were now turned. At length, after a pause, during which he appeared to be thinking deeply, he spoke, "Inkubu, Macumazan, and Bugwan, brave white men, and my friends, Infadus, my uncle and chiefs, my heart is fixed. I will strike at Twala this day, and set my fortunes on the blow, I and my life and your lives also. Listen, thus will I strike. Ye see how the hill curves round like the half-moon, and how the plain runs like a green tongue towards us within the curve." "We see," I answered. "Good, it is now midday, and the men eat and rest after the toil of battle. When the sun has turned and travelled a little way towards the dark, let the attack." 193. Regiment my uncle advance with one other down to the green tongue, and it shall be that when Twala sees it, he shall hurl his force at it to crush it. But the spot is narrow, and the regiments can come against thee one at a time only. So shall they be destroyed one by one, and the eyes of all Twala's army shall be fixed upon a struggle the like of which has not been seen by living man. And with thee my uncle shall go Inkubu, my friend, that when Twala sees his battle-axe flashing in the first rank of the greys, his heart may grow faint. And I will come with the 2nd regiment, that which follows thee, so that if ye are destroyed, as it may happen, there may yet be a king left to fight for, and with me shall come Macumazan the wise." "It is well, O king," said Infadus, apparently contemplating the certainty of the complete annihilation of his regiment with perfect calmness. "Truly, these Kukuanas are a wonderful people. Death has no terrors for them when it is incurred in the course of duty." "And whilst the eyes of the multitude of Twala's regiments are thus fixed upon the fight," went on Ignosi, "behold, 1/3 of the men who are left alive to us, Idain about 6,000, shall creep along the right horn of the hill and fall upon the left flank of Twala's force, and 1/3 shall creep along the left horn and fall upon Twala's right flank. And when I see that the horns are ready to toss Twala, then will I, with the men who are left to me, charge home in Twala's face, and if fortune goes with us, the day will be ours. And before night drives her horses from the mountains to the mountains, we shall sit in peace at King Solomon's mines." 194. King Solomon's mines. "Lu, and now let us eat and make ready, and in Fadus do thou prepare, that the plan be carried out. And stay, let my white father Bugwan go with the right horn, that his shining eye may give courage to the men." The arrangements for attack, thus briefly indicated, were set in motion with a rapidity that spoke well for the perfection of the Kukuana military system. Within little more than an hour, rations had been served out to the men and devoured. 3 divisions were formed, the plan of attack explained to the leaders, and the whole force, with the exception of a guard left with the wounded, now numbering about 18,000 men in all, was ready to be put in motion. Presently Good came up and shook hands with Sir Henry and myself. "Goodbye, you fellows," he said. "I am off with the right wing according to orders, and so I have come to shake hands in case we should not meet again, you know," he added significantly. We shook hands in silence, and not without the exhibition of as much emotion as Englishmen are wont to show. "It is a queer business," said Sir Henry, his deep voice shaking a little, "and I confess I never expect to see tomorrow's sun. As far as I can make out, the Greys, with whom I am to go, are to fight until they are wiped out in order to enable the wings to slip round unawares and outflank Twala. Well, so be it. At any rate, it will be a man's death. Goodbye, old fellow. God bless you. I hope you will pull through and live to collar the diamonds. But if you the last stand of the Greys." 195. "I do. Take my advice and don't have anything more to do with pretenders." In another second, Good had wrung us both by the hand and gone. And then Infidus came up and led off Sir Henry to his place in the forefront of the Greys, whilst with many misgivings I departed with Ignosi to my station in the 2nd Attacking Regiment. Chapter 20. The Last Stand of the Greys. In a few more minutes, the regiments destined to carry out the flanking movements had tramped off in silence, keeping carefully under the lee of the rising ground in order to conceal the movement from the keen eyes of Twala's scouts. Half an hour or more was allowed to elapse between the setting out of the horns or wings of the army before any movement was made by the Greys and the supporting regiment, known as the Buffaloes, which formed its chest, and which were destined to bear the brunt of the battle. Both of these regiments were almost perfectly fresh and of full strength, the Greys having been in reserve in the morning and having lost but a small number of men in sweeping back that part of the attack which had proved successful in breaking the line of defence on the occasion when I charged with them and got knocked silly for my pains. As for the Buffaloes, they'd formed the 3rd line of defence on the left, and as the attacking force at that point had not succeeded, 196 King Solomon's mines, in breaking through the 2nd, had scarcely come into action at all. Infidus, who was a wary old general, and knew the absolute importance of keeping up the spirits of his men on the eve of such a desperate encounter, employed the pause in addressing his own regiment, the Greys, in poetical language, in explaining to them the honour that they were receiving in being put thus in the forefront of the battle, and in having the great white warrior from the stars to fight with them in their ranks, and in promising large rewards of cattle and promotion to all who survived in the event of Ignosi's arms being successful. I looked down the long lines of waving black plumes and stern faces beneath them, and sighed to think that within one short hour most, if not all, of those magnificent veteran warriors, not a man of whom was under 40 years of age, would be laid dead or dying in the dust. It could not be otherwise. They were being condemned with that wise recklessness of human life that marks the great general, and often saves his forces and attains his ends, to certain slaughter in order to give the cause and the remainder of the army a chance of success. They were foredoomed to die, and they knew it. It was to be their task to engage regiment after regiment of Twala's army on the narrow strip of green beneath us till they were exterminated, or till the wings found a favourable opportunity for their onslaught. And yet they never hesitated, nor could I detect a sign of fear upon the face of a single warrior. There they were, going to certain death, about to quit the blessed light of day forever, and yet able to contemplate their doom with the last stand of the Greys. 197 Co. Wa ML out a tremor. I could not even at that moment help contrasting their state of mind with my own, which was far from comfortable, and breathing a sigh of envy and admiration. Never before had I seen such an absolute devotion to the idea of duty, and such a complete indifference to its bitter fruits. "Behold your king," ended old Infidus, pointing to Ignosi. Go fight and fall for him, as is the duty of brave men, and cursed and shameful for ever be the name of him who shrinks from death for his king, or who turns his back to his enemy. Behold your king, chiefs, captains, and soldiers, now do your homage to the sacred snake, and then follow on, that Incubu and I may show you the road to the heart of Twala's forces." There was a moment's pause. Then suddenly there rose from the serried phalanxes before us a murmur, like the distant whisper of the sea, caused by the gentle tapping of the handles of 6,000 spears against their holders' shields. Slowly it swelled, till its growing volume deepened and widened into a roar of rolling noise that echoed like thunder against the mountains, and filled the air with heavy waves of sound. Then it decreased and slowly died away into nothing, and suddenly out crashed the royal salute. Ignosi, I thought to myself, might well be a proud man that day, for no Roman emperor ever had such a salutation from gladiators about to die. Ignosi acknowledged this magnificent act of homage by lifting his battle-axe, and then the Greys filed off in a triple-line formation, each line containing about 1,000 fighting men, exclusive of officers. When the last line had gone some 500 yards, 198 King Solomon's mines, Ignosi put himself at the head of the buffaloes, which regiment was drawn up in a similar three-line formation, and gave the word to march, and off we went, I needless to say, uttering the most heartfelt prayers that I might come out of that job with a whole skin. Many a queer position have I found myself in, but never before in one quite so unpleasant as the present, or one in which my chance of coming off safe was so small. By the time that we reached the edge of the plateau, the Greys were already halfway, down the slope ending in the tongue of grassland that ran up into the bend of the mountain, something as the frog of a horse's foot runs up into the shoe. The excitement in Twala's camp on the plain beyond was very great, and regiment after regiment was starting for Ward at a long, swinging trot in order to reach the root of the tongue of land before the attacking force could emerge into the plain of Loo. This tongue of land, which was some 300 yards in depth, was even at its root or widest part not more than 350 paces across, while at its tip it scarcely measured 90. The Greys, who, in passing down the side of the hill and onto the tip of the tongue, had formed in column, on reaching the spot where it broadened out again, reassumed their triple-line formation, and halted dead. Then we, that is, the buffaloes, moved down the tip of the tongue and took our stand in reserve about 100 yards behind the last line of the Greys and on a slightly higher ground. Meanwhile, we had leisure to observe Twala's entire force, which had evidently been reinforced since the morning attack and the last stand of the Greys. 1999 Co. could not now, notwithstanding their losses, number less than 40,000, moving swiftly up towards us. But as they drew near the root of the tongue, they hesitated, having discovered that only one regiment could advance into the gorge at a time, and that there, some 70 yards from the mouth of it, unassailable except in front, on account of the high walls of boulder-strewn ground on either side, stood the famous regiment of Greys, the pride and glory of the Kukuana army, ready to hold the way against their forces as the three Romans once held the bridge against thousands. They hesitated and finally stopped their advance. There was no eagerness to cross spears with those three lines of grim warriors who stood so firm and ready. Presently, however, a tall general, with the customary head-dress of nodding ostrich plumes, came running up, attended by a group of chiefs and orderlies, being, I thought, none other than Twala himself, and gave an order, and the first regiment raised a shout and charged up towards the Greys, who remained perfectly still and silent till the attacking troops were within 40 yards, and a volley of tollas, or throwing knives, came rattling among their ranks. Then suddenly, with a bound and a roar, they sprang forward with uplifted spears, and the two regiments met in deadly strife. Next second, the roll of the meeting shields came to our ears like the sound of thunder, and the whole plain seemed to be alive with flashes of light reflected from the stabbing spears. To and fro swung the heaving mass of struggling, stabbing humanity, but not for long. Suddenly, the attacking lines seemed to grow thinner, and then with 200 King Solomon's mines. A slow, long heave, the Greys passed over them, just as a great wave heaves up and passes over a sunken ridge. It was done. That regiment was completely destroyed, but the Greys had but 2 lines left now. A third of their number were dead. Closing up shoulder to shoulder once more, they halted in silence and awaited attack. And I was rejoiced to catch sight of Sir Henry's yellow beard as he moved to and fro, arranging the ranks. So he was yet alive. Meanwhile, we moved up onto the ground of the encounter, which was cumbered by about 4,000 prostrate human beings, dead, dying and wounded, and literally stained red with blood. Ignosi issued an order, which was rapidly passed down the ranks, to the effect that none of the enemy's wounded were to be killed. And so far as we could see, this order was scrupulously carried out. It would have been a shocking sight if we had had time to think of it, but now a second regiment, distinguished by white plumes, kilts and shields, was moving up to the attack of the 2,000 remaining Greys who stood waiting in the same ominous silence as before, till the foe was within 40 yards or so, when they hurled themselves with irresistible force upon them. Again there came the awful roll of the meeting shields, and as we watched, the grim tragedy repeated itself. But this time the issue was left longer in doubt. Indeed, it seemed for a while almost impossible that the Greys should again prevail. The attacking regiment, which was one formed of young men, fought with the utmost fury, and at first seemed by sheer weight the last stand of the Greys. 201, jusqu'à 2 SD, to be driving the veterans back. The slaughter was something awful, hundreds falling every minute, and from among the shouts of the warriors and the groans of the dying, set to the clashing music of meeting spears, came a continuous hissing undertone of "Ski, ski," the note of triumph of each victor as he passed his spear through and through the body of his fallen foe. But perfect discipline and steady and unchanging valor can do wonders, and one veteran soldier is worth 2 young ones, as soon became apparent in the present case. For just as we thought that it was all up with the Greys, and were preparing to take their place, so soon as they made room by being destroyed, I heard Sir Henry's deep voice ringing out above the din, and caught a glimpse of his circling battle-axe as he waved it high above his plumes. Then came a change. The Greys ceased to give. They stood still as a rock, against which the furious waves of spearmen broke again and again, only to recoil. Presently they began to move again, forward this time. As they had no firearms, there was no smoke, so we could see it all. Another minute and the onslaught grew fainter. "Ah, they are men indeed. They will conquer again," called out Ignosi, who was grinding his teeth with excitement at my side. "See, it is done." Suddenly, like puffs of smoke from the mouth of a cannon, the attacking regiment broke away in flying groups, their white headdresses streaming behind them in the wind, and left their opponents victors indeed, but, alas, no more a regiment. Of the gallant triple line, which 40 minutes before had gone into action to King Solomon's mines, 3,000 strong, there remained at most some 600 blood-bespattered men. The rest were underfoot, and they cheered and waved their spears in triumph, and then, instead of falling back upon us as we expected, they ran forward for 100 yards or so after the flying groups of foemen took possession of a gently rising knoll of ground and, resuming the old triple formation, formed a threefold ring around it. And then, thanks be to God, standing on the top of the mound for a minute, I saw Sir Henry, apparently unharmed, and with him our old friend Infidus. Then Twala's regiments rolled down upon the doomed band, and once more the battle closed in. As those who read this history will probably long ago have gathered, I am, to be honest, a bit of a coward, and certainly in no way given to fighting, though somehow it has often been my lot to get into unpleasant positions and to be obliged to shed man's blood. But I have always hated it, and kept my own blood as undiminished in quantity as possible, sometimes by a judicious use of my heels. At this moment, however, for the first time in my life, I felt my bosom burn with martial ardour. Warlike. Fragments from the Ingoldsby legends, together with numbers of sanguinary verses from the Old Testament, sprang up in my brain like mushrooms in the dark. My blood, which hitherto had been half frozen with horror, went beating through my veins, and there came upon me a savage desire to kill and spare not. I glanced round at the serried ranks of warriors behind us, and somehow, all in an instant, began to wonder if my face looked like theirs. There they stood, their heads craned forward over their shields, the hands twitch, the last stand of the Greys. 20301D10ing, the lips apart, the fierce features instinct with the hungry lust of battle, and in the eyes a look like the glare of a bloodhound when he sights his quarry. Only Ignosi's heart seemed, to judge from his comparative self-possession, to all appearance, to beat as calmly as ever beneath his leopard skin cloak, though even he still kept on grinding his teeth. I could stand it no longer. Are we to stand here till we put out roots? Bopa Ignosi, I mean while Twala swallows our brothers yonder? I asked. Nay, Macumazahn, was the answer. See, now is the ripe moment. Let us pluck it. As he spoke, a fresh regiment rushed past the ring upon the little mound, and wheeling round, attacked it from the hither side. Then, lifting his battle-axe, Ignosi gave the signal to advance, and raising the Kukuana battle cry, the buffaloes charged home with a rush like the rush of the sea. What followed immediately on this, it is out of my power to tell. All I can remember is a wild yet ordered rushing that seemed to shake the ground, a sudden change of front and forming up on the part of the regiment against which the charge was directed. Then an awful shock, a dull roar of voices, and a continuous flashing of spears, seen through a red mist of blood. When my mind cleared, I found myself standing inside the remnant of the Greys near the top of the mound, and just behind no less a person than Sir Henry himself. How I got there I had at the moment no idea, but Sir Henry afterwards told me that I was 204 King Solomon's Mines, borne up by the first furious charge of the buffaloes almost to his feet, and then left, as they in turn were pressed back. Thereon he dashed out of the circle and dragged me into it. As for the fight that followed, who can describe it? Again and again the multitude surged up against our momentarily lessening circle, and again we beat them back. The stubborn spearmen still made good the dark impenetrable wood, each stepping where his comrade stood the instant that he fell, as I think the Ingoldsby Legends beautifully puts it. It was a splendid thing to see those brave battalions come on time after time over the barriers of their dead sometimes, holding corpses before them to receive our spear thrusts, only to leave their own corpses to swell the rising piles. It was a gallant sight to see that sturdy old warrior in fadoos, as cool as though he were on parade, shouting out orders, taunts, and even jests, to keep up the spirit of his few remaining men, and then, as each charge rolled up, stepping forward, to wherever the fighting was thickest, to bear his share in repelling it. And yet more gallant was the vision of Sir Henry, whose ostrich plumes had been shorn off by a spear stroke, so that his long yellow hair streamed out in the breeze behind him. There he stood, the great Dane, for he was nothing else, his hands, his axe, and his armour all red with blood, and none could live before his stroke. Time after time I saw it come sweeping down, as some great warrior ventured to give him battle, and as he struck he shouted, "Ahoy, ahoy!" like his berserkir.